Hi, good evening and welcome back to today's Roznama. And this is the daily newspaper analysis for the 14th of March. So let's make a start without any further ado. So the top two things on the front page of the newspaper. Number one, a notice has been submitted in Parliament by the opposition parties. 193 members of the opposition have submitted this notice seeking the removal of the Chief Election Commissioner. We'll be looking at this in detail in one of the future slides. Absolutely important. You should 100% know his name. This is Mr. Gyanesh Kumar, the current Chief Election Commissioner. As I always remind you, you must know the first Chief Election Commissioner, Sukumar Sen, and the first female Chief Election Commissioner, V.S. Rama Devi. And just about a month back on the 25th of January, we observed the National Voters' Day. The other one, of course, indicates the growing costs of the war initiated by the US and Israel against Iran, right? As you can see, even in India, the benchmark indices of our stock exchanges, the Sensex and the Nifty 50 are down. This has been one of the very bad weeks economically for the stock market. Crude prices are high. The rupee is touching all-time lows. Gold prices are high. Okay, so that indicates a perfect economic crisis. The government has assured that it is not an LPG crisis yet, that things are stable. There is no dry out, there is no shortage. Of course, the government issued the natural gas supply regulation recently in order to prioritize the sectors which require natural gas in the country. Why is this impacting India so much? Because we are heavily reliant on imports for both natural gas as well as crude oil. We have large stores of coal, but we import oil and natural gas. Okay. With that preamble, let's move on. A very important piece of news. The government, the union government, has suggested the creation of the Economic Stabilization Fund. Okay, the Economic Stabilization Fund. Now, what is the job of this fund? This will basically be an amount available with the government in order to meet sudden requirements like the ones created by the US and Israeli war on Iran, right? So it's there, it has a broader objective. It's not just been created for this particular war. But the overall idea is that there will be this 1 lakh crore Economic Stabilization Fund at the disposal of the union government in order to create economic stability whenever required in emergency economic situations. So right now, an allocation of 57,381 crore rupees has been made for the Economic Stabilization Fund. This is being allocated from the previous financial year, which is still going on. So this is 2025-2026 financial year, from which this allocation of 57,381 crore has been made for the Economic Stabilization Fund, which is there to offset, to deal with global headwinds such as wars, supply crises, supply chain problems, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I hope this is absolutely clear. The total value of this proposed fund will be 1 lakh crore. As of now, about 57,000 crore has been allocated. Okay, so I hope this is crystal clear. You can see here the Union Minister of Finance, Nirmala Sitharaman. She is called the first full-time female finance minister. Of course, the first female to be the finance minister was Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Okay, so I hope this is crystal clear. And there is one other record she holds. She holds the record for the most number of consecutive or back-to-back budgets ever presented. Okay, all right. Moving forward, this is an editorial from the Hindu, which essentially deals with the oil crisis. Right, as you know, the price of crude oil has increased quite a bit after the war with Iran, and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, right? So this editorial calls for India to find sustainable sources of energy, right? So the hint is towards renewable sources such as solar, wind, nuclear, and so on and so forth. Moving forward, an important editorial in the Hindu deals with a Supreme Court judgment. Okay. Now, this is the judgment. You might have seen this in yesterday's top 5 in the Roznama on our website, clatpossible.com. You might have seen this. There is a judgment of the Supreme Court which says, of course, the right to health is a part of the right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution. And whenever the state or the government undertakes a widespread health measure like vaccination, the government must also provide for compensation in case something goes wrong. So in this case, the Supreme Court ordered the creation of a no-fault compensation policy for whom? For people who suffered adverse effects of the COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, so I hope this is clear. This is an important one. It will be relevant both for legal as well as general knowledge. Okay, all right. Moving forward. Now, something interesting that's come up in an editorial today by Shashi Tharoor. Okay, so what he talks about is the Washington Consensus. Okay, now this is a phrase, it's written exactly this way. The idea is, this is a set of 10 economic policy proposals which were developed in the 1980s and then continued into the 1990s. So what are these 10 proposals? These are 10 proposals, 10 economic policy proposals, which were the key reform suggestions for developing countries which are in economic crisis. And why is it called the Washington Consensus? Because these were the preferred reform suggestions of the Washington DC based international organizations, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So it had suggestions like trade liberalization, tax reforms, fiscal responsibility, and so on and so forth. So there were 10 points of this sort which were considered the standard economic policy reform suggestions in the 80s and 90s. And who is the person who coined this word and this idea? His name is John Williamson. Okay, John Williamson is the person who came up with this concept, and this name, the Washington Consensus, has endured. Okay, so Shashi Tharoor, of course, writes it in a somewhat ironical way, like what is the fate of the Washington Consensus? Because the world has again been found drowning in war, right? And the idea of the 80s and 90s was that with the Washington Consensus type of proposals and economic reforms, trade would improve, improving relations between the countries of the world. It was an essentially capitalist idea of the world system. Anyway, so it's an interesting article. You should certainly go through it. You should know what is the idea of the Washington Consensus, who came up with it, John Williamson. How many reform points under the Washington Consensus? 10. Why is it called Washington Consensus? Because these policy proposals were promoted by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank, both of which are headquartered in Washington, DC. Okay, I hope this is absolutely clear. Moving forward, as I had previewed earlier, 193 India bloc MPs submitted a notice for the removal of the Chief Election Commission. Okay, so India is the Indian National Developmental Inclusive Alliance. Okay, all right. So the India bloc, led by the Indian National Congress, 193 MPs submitted a notice for the removal of the Chief Election Commission. We've already seen his name. His name is Gyanesh Kumar. Okay. In fact, this is the first time in the history of India that a motion for the removal of any chief election commissioner has ever been actually submitted. Okay, let alone being passed. Till date, no such motion has ever actually reached the stage of being submitted to the presiding officer. Okay, it of course charges the chief election commissioner with partisan behavior, not behaving in an independent manner as is required by the constitution for the Election Commission of India. Okay, so this motion has been moved. Now, the constitution in Article 324 provides that the chief election commissioner can be removed only on the same grounds and in the same manner as a judge of the Supreme Court. That process is provided under Article 124. What are the grounds? Proved misbehavior or incapacity. What majority is required in each house to remove the CEC? 2/3 majority of those who are present and voting, and simple majority of the total membership. Okay, so that is the idea. And this motion, this notice has been given. Now the motion will come up for debate. It is likely going to be defeated since the government is expected to support the chief election commission. Okay, so I hope this is clear. We will do this in a little more detail once it comes up for debate. Moving forward, coming back to Iran and the US and Israel. So Iranian officials have called for BRICS to play a positive role in global security. So what is BRICS? It is the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa grouping, which now comprises of 11 members, including Indonesia, right? And this is the grouping that had originally been established in 2006. They held their first summit in Yekaterinburg in 2009. And slowly and steadily, the organization has expanded. Now remember, BRICS does not have a headquarters. It is simply a grouping of countries who cooperate on certain specific issues like economics, etc. Okay, so Iran is calling on BRICS. Why is BRICS important this year? Because India is the chair of BRICS in 2026. Okay, India is the chair of the BRICS grouping in 2026. That is absolutely important. We have covered this in some detail in the month of January. You'll also be able to see it in our January magazine. All right, moving forward, just a quick point. India and Seychelles have conducted a military exercise called L'Amitié, okay, which translates to friendship. So this is a joint military exercise between which two countries? Between India and Seychelles. Okay, usually you don't have to know much about these specific exercises unless it's a big one or it has some special strategic importance. So for this, it's enough to know the name of the exercise, L'Amitié, and the names of the two countries, India and Seychelles. Okay, all right. Moving forward, now something interesting. It has not happened yet. It has not passed yet, but there is an effort afoot to amend the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019. Okay, so we will discuss it once the bill comes up for debate. But essentially, the definition of a transgender person might be changed. As the title suggests, the bill seeks to redefine the word transgender person and remove the words self-perceived identity. Now, this is the crux of the definition of a transgender person, right? Where one's biological sex differs from a person's self-perceived gender identity. I am not sure what would be left in the definition if this were removed, but let's see the final text of the bill. We will be seeing more analysis on this in the editorials in the coming days, and you will of course get passages in the Roznama to practice legal reasoning on this. Okay, so I hope this is absolutely clear. Moving forward, as you might have seen a few days back, the US had launched an investigation into many countries, including India. Now they have launched a fresh investigation. So what is the latest? The US has launched this investigation under the US Trade Act. Okay. So this is under section 301B of the Trade Act of 1974. Okay. So the new probe is over the issue of forced labor. Okay. All right. So just be clear on that. The first investigation was focused on India and 15 other countries to examine whether they use excess manufacturing capacity to export to the US to the detriment of American firms. Okay, so these are two investigations which have been launched by the US back to back against India within the span of 1 week. What is the background to this? Remember, the sweeping tariffs imposed by Trump all over the world had been imposed under a law called IEEPA or IEEPA. And the US Supreme Court had struck down those tariffs, saying that the act did not give power to the president to impose such sorts of tariffs. So after that, the president used different authorities under different laws in the US in order to impose a new global sort of duty or tariff. And then in order to keep them going, these investigations are being launched by the United States. Okay. Proceeding forward, as you know, the war continues. There was a rally in Tehran, basically a show of strength that the country has not given up after the major attacks by Israel and the United States on their territory and on their leadership. As you all know, the second supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was assassinated in the attacks. The new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, the third supreme leader, he is also said to be injured. He has in fact not been seen in public even after his election as the third supreme leader. So there was this protest in Tehran. It was led by the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian. In fact, even as the rally progressed, a different part of Tehran was hit by an air strike. Okay. Moving forward, some statements by Iranian leaders that they will try that ships carrying oil and fuel and natural gas to India through the Strait of Hormuz. That Iranian forces will try to ensure safe passage for such ships. So I am not sure if this totally resolves the situation. Some news channels have engaged in blatant sensationalism, first about the war, then about shortages, and now that those shortages have been cured. But we should not be carried away by such news stories, especially in mainstream media in India. We should focus on what has actually been said, what has actually been ordered. It is for this reason that we focus on the Indian Express and the Hindu primarily, because these papers generally do not engage in too much sensationalism. Okay, moving forward, we've already discussed this. There's an interesting explainer in the Indian Express today, which says that amid the oil supply crunch, who is the big winner? It is Russia. Because Russia, with its own oil reserves and with separate maritime shipping routes which do not pass through the Strait of Hormuz, is suddenly a very lucrative candidate for countries to buy oil from. In fact, as you know, the US has had sanctions on Russia for a while, especially after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. But these days, India and other countries have been granted waivers by the United States, saying that for a temporary period, we don't mind if you buy oil from Russia. At the end of the day, if countries lose their supply through the Strait of Hormuz and they are unable to buy oil from Russia, it would ultimately lead to a shock to the oil market. That is the reason that the United States has even permitted countries to buy oil from Russia. It's granted waivers on its own sanctions. Hence, this article suggests that amid the oil supply crunch or shortage, the big winner is Russia. Okay. Moving forward, I just wanted to flag this again. There have been several editorials on these topics. Both Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh have proposed social media bans. They proposed different ages of minors for whom social media would be banned. However, these bans have been suggested. There are reports that the union government also might introduce a law, not to ban, but to restrict certain kinds of contents for people of specific age groups. So let's see how this takes shape. If it comes to pass, it will certainly be challenged in the High Courts and the Supreme Court. So we will have to keep an eye out for it. But over these days, we have been seeing several editorials arguing about the best way forward. This is one such editorial. Moving forward, there was another analysis today in the newspaper by Ram Madhav, a member of the BJP and the RSS. He writes that in Nepal and Bangladesh, the people have spoken. So I just flagged this article to make sure you remember the leaders of these two countries, right? So in Nepal, which party has just won the election? The Rashtriya Swatantra Party, and the likely head of this government will be Balendra Shah, though the swearing in has not occurred yet. In Bangladesh, it is Tariq Rahman who has won from the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. Okay, you have to absolutely remember this. This is right in our backyard in the Indian subcontinent. So what must you remember about Bangladesh? Who was the leader who was ousted by the July Revolution? Sheikh Hasina. She is currently staying in India. Who became the head of the interim government? The chief advisor, Muhammad Yunus. And once elections were conducted, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party won. And who became the Prime Minister? Tariq Rahman. Okay. In Nepal, it was a Gen Z revolution. Who was the PM who was forced to resign? KP Sharma Oli. Who was the head of the interim government? It was Sushila Karki, the first female PM of Nepal and the first female Chief Justice of Nepal. And once elections were conducted, the Rashtriya Swatantra Party has won, with the likely Prime Minister being Balendra Shah. And he is going to be the first Buddhist PM of Nepal. Okay, so I hope these details are crystal clear. These days, there are several articles in the news focusing on Iran, but one interesting article today, and you can try questions on this article on the Roznama. Do log in, do try it every day. We give you the questions from the day's editorials. We call it a mini Clat because it's 25 questions, all subjects, every day on that day's editorials. You get the top 5 news stories of the day as slides. You get this video and you get the words of the day to remember and practice those very words. It's a perfect little package and it's the perfect sort of daily dose for your Clat preparation. So this article says that the society bears the AI risks and must have a say in AI governance. So this article is arguing against the wild west, that you let the companies do what they wish with reference to AI. The authors argue that it is the society as a whole, humanity as a whole, which will be bearing the risks of artificial intelligence, and therefore it must have a role through its representatives, through governments, and directly with people's movements. It must have a role in the governance of AI as well. Okay, so do try out the questions on this particular article. As I had suggested, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War of the United States, has made a statement that Iran's new supreme leader is wounded and likely disfigured. In fact, in the very strike which killed the previous supreme leader, it is likely that the next supreme leader, recently elected by the Assembly of Experts, Mojtaba Khamenei, was also injured. Okay, so he has not been seen in public after that. So let us await further developments. I don't want to speculate on this matter. Moving forward, we already saw about the rally. The last point I wanted to mention is with respect to FIFA. Okay, so as you know, the FIFA World Cup is taking place this year, mid-year, and 3 countries together are the hosts. What are these 3 countries? It is the USA, Mexico, and Canada. Okay, your homework is to find out the mascots, the 3 mascots of the FIFA Men's World Cup this year. It's going to take place at venues across all 3 countries. Iran had also qualified, but increasingly it seems unlikely that the Iranian team will play. We will, of course, await further developments, and the final say will be with FIFA, the United States, as well as Iran. Okay, so I just wanted to flag this for you. This year, for your CLAT and ALET, the FIFA Men's World Cup is important. You must know the hosts, you must know the mascots, and you must also know the headquarters of FIFA and the president of FIFA. Okay, so all of those 4 points are homework for you to find out. That's all for today, and I'm happy to have had you here with me this evening. Goodbye and good night.